Hans, mein Herr, has gone into Broek to look for work. He'll be back soon. Will the mister please be seated?" Whether the hard polished stool offered by Dame Brinker did not look particularly inviting, or whether the dame herself frightened him, partly because she was a woman and partly because an anxious, distressed look had suddenly appeared on her face, I cannot say. Certain it is that our eccentric doctor looked hurriedly about him, muttered something about extraordinary case, bowed, and disappeared, before Dame Brinker had time to say another word. Strange that the visit of their good benefactor should have left a cloud. Yet so it was. Gretel frowned, an anxious, childish frown, and kneaded the bread dough violently without looking up. Dame Brinker hurried to her husband's bedside, leaned over him, and fell into silent but passionate weeping. In a moment, Hans entered. "Why, mother," he whispered in alarm, "what ails thee? Is the father worse?" She turned her quivering face toward him, making no attempt to conceal her distress. "Yes, he is starving, perishing. The meester said it." Hans turned pale. "What does this mean, mother? We must feed him at once. Here, Gretel, give me the porridge." "Nay," cried his mother distractedly. "It may kill him. Our poor fare is too heavy for him. Oh, Hans, he will die. The father will die. If we use him this way, he must have meat and sweet wine and a deck-bed. Oh, what shall I do?" She sobbed, wringing her hands. "There's not a stiver in the house." Gretel pouted. It was the only way she could express sympathy just then. Her tears fell one by one into the dough. "Did the meester say he must have these things, mother?" asked Hans. "Yes, he did." "Well, mother, don't cry. He shall have them. I shall bring meat and wine before night. Take the cover from my bed. I can sleep in the straw." "Yes, Hans, but it is heavy, scant as it is. The meester said he must have something light and warm. He will perish. Our peat is giving out, Hans. The father has wasted it sorely, throwing it on when I was not looking. Dear man." "Never mind, mother," said Hans cheerfully. "We can cut down the willow tree and burn it if need be. But I'll bring home something tonight. There must be work in Amsterdam, though there's none in Broek. Never fear, mother, the worst of trouble is over. We can brave anything now that the father is himself again." "Hey," sobbed Dame Brinker hastily, drying her eyes. "That is true, indeed. Of course it is. Look at him, mother, how softly he sleeps. Do you think God would let him starve just after giving him back to us? Why, mother, I'm as sure of getting all the father needs as if my pocket were bursting with gold. There now. Don't fret." And hurriedly kissing her, Hans caught up his skates and slipped from the cottage. Poor Hans! Disappointed in his morning's errand, half sickened with his new trouble, he wore a brave look and tried to whistle as he tramped resolutely off with the firm intention of mending matters. Want had never before pressed as sorely upon the Brinker family. Their stock of peat was nearly exhausted, and all the flour in the cottage was in Gretchel's dough. They had scarcely cared to eat during the past few days, scarcely realizing their condition. Dame Brinker had felt so sure that she and the children could earn money before the worst came, that she had given herself up to the joy of her husband's recovery. She had not even told Hans that the few pieces of silver in the old mitten were quite gone. Hans reproached himself now that he had not hailed the doctor when he saw him enter his coach and drive rapidly away in the direction of Amsterdam. Perhaps there is some mistake, he thought. The meester surely would have known that meat and sweet wine were not at our command, and yet the father looks very weak. He certainly does. I must get work. If mein Herr van Hope were back from Rotterdam, I could get plenty to do. But Master Pete told me to let him know if he could do aught to service. I shall go to him at once. Oh, if it were but summer! All this time Hans was hastening toward the canal. Soon his skates were on, and he was skimming rapidly toward the residence of Mynheer van Hope. The father must have meat and wine at once, he muttered. But how can I earn the money in time to buy them today? There is no other way but to go as I promised to Master Peter. What would a gift of meat and wine be to him? When the father is once fed, I can rush down to Amsterdam and earn the morrow's supply. Then came other thoughts, thoughts that made his heart thump heavily and his cheeks burn with a new shame. It's begging, to say the least. Not one of the Brinkers has ever been a beggar. Shall I be the first? Shall my poor father, just coming back into life, learn that his family have asked for charity? He, always so wise and thrifty? No, cried Hans aloud, better 1,000 times to part with the watch. I can at least borrow money on it in Amsterdam, he thought, turning around. That will be no disgrace. I can find work at once and get it back again. Nay, perhaps I can even speak to the father about it. This last thought almost made the lad dance for joy. Why not, indeed? Speak to the father. He was a rational being now. He may wake, thought Hans, quite bright and rested. May tell us the watch is of no consequence to sell it. Of course. Kaiser! And Hans almost flew over the ice. A few moments more, and the skates were again swinging from his arm. He was running toward the cottage. His mother met him at the door. "Oh, Hans!" she cried, her face radiant with joy. "The young lady was here with her maid. She brought everything, meat, jelly, wine, and bread, a whole basketful. Then the meester sent a man from town with more wine, and a fine bed and blankets for the father. Oh, he will get well now." "God bless them! God bless them!" echoed Hans, and for the first time that day his eyes filled with tears. That evening, Ralph Brinker felt so much better that he insisted upon sitting up a while on the rough, high-backed chair by the fire. For a few moments there was quite a commotion in the little cottage. Hans was all-important on the occasion, for his father was a heavy man and needed something firm to lean upon. The dame, though none of your fragile ladies, was in such a state of alarm and excitement at the bold step they were taking in lifting him without the meester's orders, that she came near pulling her husband over, even while she believed herself to be his main prop and support. "Steady, Frau, steady," panted Ralph. "Have I grown old and feeble? Or is it the fever that makes me thus helpless?" "Hear the man," laughed Dame Brinker, "talking like any other Christian. Why, you're only weak from the fever, Ralph. Here's the chair, all fixed, snug and warm. Now sit thee down. Hi-de-di-di, there we are." With these words, Dame Brinker let her half of the burden settle slowly into the chair. Hans prudently did the same. Meanwhile, Gretel flew about generally, bringing every possible thing to her mother to tuck behind the father's back and spread over his knees. Then she twitched the carved bench under his feet, and Hans kicked the fire to make it brighter. The father was sitting up at last. What wonder that he looked about him like one bewildered. Little Hans had been almost carrying him. The baby was over 4 feet long, and was demurely brushing up the hearth with a bundle of willow-wisps. Met the Frau, winsome and fair as ever, had gained at least 50 pounds in what seemed to him a few hours. She also had some new lines in her face that puzzled him. The old familiar things in the room were the pine table that he had made before he was married, the Bible upon the shelf, and the cupboard in the corner. Ah, Ralph Brinker, it was only natural that your eyes should fill with hot tears even while looking at the joyful faces of your loved ones. 10 years dropped from a man's life are no small loss. 10 years of manhood, of household happiness and care, 10 years of honest labor, of conscious enjoyment of sunshine and outdoor beauty, 10 years of grateful life. One day looking forward to all this, the next waking to find them past and blank. What wonder the scalding tears dropped one by one upon your cheek. Tender little Gretel, the prayer of her life was answered through those tears. She loved her father from that moment. Hans and his mother glanced silently at each other when they saw her spring toward him and throw her arms about his neck. Father, dear father, pressing her cheek close to his, don't cry. We are all here. And then Ralph sobbed and kissed her again and again and said, God bless thee. I had forgotten that. Soon he looked up again and spoke in a cheerful voice. I should know her, Frau, he said, holding the sweet young face between his hands and gazing at it as though he were watching it grow. I should know her. The same blue eyes and the lips, and ah me, the little song she could sing almost before she could stand. But that was long ago, he added with a sigh, still looking at her dreamily. Long ago. It's all gone now. Not indeed. No, not so, cried Dame Brinker eagerly. Do you think I would let her forget it? Gretel, child, sing the old, old song thou hast known so long. Ralph Brinker's hands fell wearily, and his eyes closed, but it was something to see the smile playing about his mouth as Gretel's voice floated about him like sweet incense. It was a simple air. She had never known the words. With loving instinct she softened every note until Ralph almost fancied that his 2-year-old baby was once more beside him. As soon as the song was finished, Hans mounted a wooden stool and began to rummage in the cupboard. Have a care, Hans, said Dame Brinker, who through all her poverty was a very tidy housewife. Have a care. The wine is there at your right side, and the white bread beyond it. Never fear, mother, answered Hans, reaching far back on the upper shelf. I shall do no mischief. And jumping down, he walked toward his father, and placed an oblong block of pine wood in his hand. One of its ends was rounded off, and some deep cuts had been made on the top. Do you know what it is, father? Asked Hans. Ralph Brinker's face brightened. Indeed I do, boy. It's the boat I was making you. Yes, alack, not yesterday, but years ago. I have kept it ever since, father. It can be finished when your hands grow strong again. Yes, but not for you, my lad. I must wait for the grandchildren. Why, you are nearly a man. Have you helped your mother, boy, through all these years? Ay, and bravely, put in Dame Brinker. Let me see, muttered the father, looking in a puzzled way at them all. How long is it since the night when the waters were coming in? 'Tis the last I remember. We have told thee true, Ralph, It was 10 years last Pinkster week. 10 years. And I fell then, you say. Has the fever been on me ever since? Dame Brinker scarce knew how to reply. Should she tell him all? Tell him that he had been an idiot, almost a lunatic? The doctor had charged her on no account to worry or excite his patient. Hans and Gretel looked astonished. Like enough, Ralph, she said, nodding her head and raising her eyebrows. When a heavy man like thee falls on his head, 'tis hard to say what will come. But thou art well now, Ralph. Thank the good Lord. The newly awakened man bowed his head. Eh? Well enough. Mein Frau, he said after a moment's silence. But my brain turns somehow like a spinning wheel. It will not be right till I get on the dikes again. When shall I be at work, think you? Hear the man, cried Dame Brinker, delighted, yet frightened too, for that matter. We must get him to bed. Hans, work, indeed. They tried to raise him from the chair, but he was not ready yet. Be off with ye, he said, with something like his old smile. Gretel had never seen it before. Does a man want to be lifted about like a log? I tell you, before 3 suns I shall be on the dikes again. Ah, there'll be some stout fellows to greet me. Jan Kamphusen and young Hootsvliet. They've been good friends to thee, Hans, I'll warrant. Hans looked at his mother. Young Hoogsvliet had been dead 5 years, and Jan Kamphusen was in the jail at Amsterdam. They've done their share, no doubt, said Dame Brinker, carrying the inquiry, had we asked them, but what with working and studying, Hans has been busy enough without seeking comrades. Working and studying, echoed Ralph in a musing tone. Can the youngsters read and cipher, Mitzi? You should hear them, she answered proudly. They can run through a book while I mop the floor. Hans there is as happy over a page of big words as a rabbit in a cabbage patch. As for ciphering... Here, lad, help a bit, interrupted Ralph Brinker. I must get me on the bed. None, seeing the humble supper eaten in the Brinker cottage that night, would have dreamed of the dainty fare hidden away nearby. Hans and Gretel looked rather wistfully toward the cupboard as they drank their cupful of water and ate their scanty share of black bread. But even in thought they did not rob their father. He relished his supper well, said Dame Brinker, nodding sidewise toward the bed, and fell asleep the next moment. Ah, the dear man will be feeble for many a day. He wanted sore to sit up again, but while I made show of humoring him and getting ready, he dropped off. Remember that, my girl. When you have a man of your own, and many a day may it be before that comes to pass, remember, you can never rule by differing. Humble wife is husband's boss. Tut, tut. Never swallow such a mouthful as that again, child. Why, I could make a meal off 2 such pieces. What's in thee, Hans? One would think they were cobwebs on the wall. Oh, no, mother. I was only thinking. Thinking about what? No use asking, she added in a changed tone. I was thinking of the same a while ago. Well, well, it's no blame if we did look to hear something by this time about the 1,000 guilders. But no, not a word. No, it's plain enough. He knows naught about them. Hans looked up anxiously, dreading lest his mother should grow agitated as usual when speaking of the lost money. but she silently nibbled her bread, and looking with a doleful stare toward the window. 1,000 guilders? Echoed a faint voice from the bed. Ah, I am sure they have been of good use to you, Frau, through the long years while your man was idle. The poor woman started up. These words quite destroyed the hope of late that had been glowing within her. Are you awake, Ralph? She faltered. Yes, Metji, and I feel much better. Our money was well saved, Frau, I was saying. Did it last through all these 10 years? I have not got it, Ralph. He was going to tell him the whole truth when Hans lifted his finger warningly and whispered, Remember what the Meester told us. The father must not be worried. Speak to him, child, she answered, trembling. Hans hurried to the bedside. I am glad you are feeling better, he said, leaning over his father. Another day will see you quite strong again. Ay, like enough. How long did the money last, Hans? I could not hear your mother. What did she say? I said, Ralph, stammered Dame Brinker in great distress. I said that it was all gone. Well, well, wife, do not fret at that. 1,000 guilders is not very much for 10 years, and with children to bring up. But it has helped to make you comfortable. Have you had much sickness to bear? No, sobbed Dame Brinker, lifting her apron to her eyes. Tut, tut, woman, why do you cry? Said Ralph kindly. We will soon fill another pouch when I'm on my feet again. Lucky I told you about it before I fell. Told me what, man? Why, that I buried the money. In my dream just now it seemed I had never said aught about it. Dame Brinker started forward. Hans caught her arm. Psst, mother, he whispered, hastily leading her away. We must be careful. Then, while she stood with clasped hands, waiting in breathless anxiety, he once more approached the cot. Trembling with eagerness, he said, That was a troublesome dream. Do you remember when you buried the money, father? Yes, my boy. It was before daylight on the same day that I was hurt. John Camphusen said something the sundown before that made me distrust his honesty. He was the only one living, besides mother, who knew that we had saved 1,000 guilders. So I rose up that night and buried the money. Blockhead, that I was ever to suspect an old friend. I'll be bound, father, pursued Hans in a laughing voice, motioning to his mother and Gretel to remain quiet, that you've forgotten where you buried it. Ha, ha, not I, indeed. But good night, my son, I can sleep again. Hans would have walked away, but his mother's gestures were not to be disobeyed, so he said gently, Good night, father. Where did you say you buried the money? I was only a little one then. Close by the willow sapling behind the cottage, said Ralph Brinker drowsily. Ah, yes. North side of the tree, wasn't it, father? No, the south side. Ah, you know the spot well enough, you rogue. Like enough you were there when your mother lifted it. Now, son, easy. Shift this pillow, so. Good night. Good night, father, said Hans, ready to dance for joy. The moon rose very late that night, shining in full and clear at the little window, but its beams did not disturb Ralph Brinker. He slept soundly, so did Gretel. As for Hans and his mother, they had something else to do.